The bullet tore through the wooden cross behind Reverend Malachi Crawford's head during Sunday service, and everyone in the congregation knew it was meant for Quinn Yates, even though he was nowhere near the church that morning. Quinn had been working the Stevens Ranch for 3 years by the summer of 1878, his hands calloused from roping cattle, and his face weathered from the California sun that beat down mercilessly on the valley outside Yosemite. He was 24 years old, tall and lean with dark hair that always seemed to need cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds rolling over the Sierra Nevada. He kept to himself mostly, speaking only when necessary, working harder than any 2 men combined, and never once stepping foot inside Reverend Crawford's church, despite numerous invitations that felt more like warnings than welcomes. The Reverend had made his feelings about Quinn Yates abundantly clear from the first day the cowboy rode into town. There was something about Quinn that set the preacher's teeth on edge, something wild and untamed that could not be molded or controlled. Perhaps it was the way Quinn looked at his daughter Magnolia, or perhaps it was simply that Quinn represented everything the Reverend had spent his life preaching against: freedom without faith, strength without scripture, and a heart that answered to no authority but its own. Magnolia Crawford was 19 years old that summer, with hair the color of wheat at harvest time and eyes like the California sky on a perfect day. She had grown up in her father's church, had memorized every verse he demanded, had sat through every sermon with her hands folded primly in her lap. But something had changed in her 3 years ago, right around the time Quinn Yates rode into town looking for work. She had started asking questions her father could not answer, had started looking out the window during services, had started finding reasons to walk past the Stevens Ranch on her way to deliver meals to the elderly widow Thompson, whose house was nowhere near the ranch at all. The first time Magnolia spoke to Quinn, she was carrying a basket of bread her mother had baked, and he was fixing a fence post that had splintered during a storm. She had stopped on the road, watching him work for a full minute before he noticed her standing there. When he finally looked up, she had felt something shift in her chest, something that had nothing to do with scripture or salvation, and everything to do with the way his eyes met hers without flinching or looking away. "That looks like hard work," she had said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Most things worth doing are," Quinn had replied, and there was something in his voice that suggested he was not just talking about fence posts. They had talked for 20 minutes that day, about nothing important and everything that mattered. He told her about growing up in Nevada, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about drifting from ranch to ranch until he found the Stevens place. She told him about her mother's bread recipe, about the way the wildflowers bloomed in spring, about how she sometimes felt like the church walls were closing in on her, even though the building was spacious and filled with light. When she finally walked away, Quinn had gone back to his work with a strange feeling in his chest, like something had woken up inside him after a long sleep. And Magnolia had gone home and lied to her father for the first time in her life, telling him the widow Thompson had been feeling poorly when in truth she had never made it to the widow's house at all. Over the next 3 years, they had built a relationship in stolen moments and secret meetings. Magnolia would find reasons to ride out toward the ranch, and Quinn would find reasons to be working near the road. They talked about everything and nothing, shared dreams and fears, and slowly, inevitably, fell in love with an intensity that neither had known was possible. Magnolia knew her father would never approve. Reverend Crawford had made his opinion of Quinn Yates known from every pulpit, had called him a sinner and a scoundrel, had warned his congregation about the dangers of men who lived outside God's grace. He had forbidden Magnolia from speaking to Quinn, from even looking in his direction during the rare occasions when their paths crossed in town. But Magnolia had discovered something about herself during those 3 years. She was stronger than anyone had given her credit for, including herself. She loved her father, respected him in many ways, but she loved Quinn Yates in a way that transcended duty and obedience. She loved him with her whole heart, and no amount of preaching or prohibition could change that simple truth. Quinn felt the same way, though he was slower to admit it. He had been alone for so long that the idea of belonging to someone, of being loved and loving in return, felt dangerous and wonderful in equal measure. He knew the Reverend hated him, knew that pursuing Magnolia would bring trouble down on both their heads. But when he looked at her, when he heard her laugh or watched the way the sunlight caught in her hair, he knew he would face whatever consequences came their way. The shooting during Sunday service changed everything. The bullet had come through the window at an angle, embedding itself in the wooden cross behind the pulpit just as Reverend Crawford was reaching the crescendo of his sermon about sin and redemption. Women screamed, men dove for cover, and the Reverend stood frozen at his pulpit, staring at the hole in the sacred symbol behind him. Sheriff Daniel Morrison found the shooter an hour later, a drifter named Jack Colton, who was already 3 whiskeys deep at the saloon and bragging about how he had been hired to send a message. He would not say who had hired him, but he made it clear the message was for Quinn Yates. Leave town or the next bullet would not miss. Quinn heard about the shooting from Tom Stevens, the ranch owner, who rode out to the grazing pasture where Quinn was working. Tom was a fair man in his 50s who had always treated Quinn with respect, and the worry on his face was genuine. "This is serious, Quinn," Tom said, sitting heavy in his saddle. "Someone wants you gone bad enough to shoot up a church. Could have killed the Reverend, could have killed anyone in that congregation." Quinn's jaw tightened. "I have done nothing wrong. I work hard, keep to myself, and bother no one." "I know that," Tom said, "but someone does not see it that way. Any idea who might want you gone?" Quinn knew exactly who wanted him gone, but he did not say the name out loud. Instead, he asked, "Was anyone hurt?" "No, thank God. But Magnolia Crawford was in that church, Quinn. She could have been hit." The thought of Magnolia in danger made Quinn's blood run cold. He had been careful, they both had been, meeting only in secret, never giving anyone cause to suspect the depth of their feelings. But somehow someone had figured it out, and now Magnolia was at risk because of him. That night, Quinn rode into town for the first time in months. He tied his horse outside the general store and walked down the main street with his head high and his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. He was not looking for trouble, but he would not run from it either. He had spent 3 years being invisible, being careful, and it had not been enough. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. He found Sheriff Morrison at his office, a small building next to the jail. The sheriff was a reasonable man in his early 40s, weathered and practical, more interested in keeping the peace than enforcing every letter of the law. He looked up when Quinn walked in, and something like resignation crossed his face. "Figured you would show up eventually," Morrison said. "Have a seat." Quinn remained standing. "I want to know who hired Colton." "He is not talking," Morrison said. "And even if he was, I am not sure it would matter. You have made an enemy, Yates, and my advice is to move on before this gets worse." "I have done nothing to make enemies," Quinn said, his voice hard. "I work, I keep to myself, and I bother no one." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Quinn with shrewd eyes. "You really do not know, do you? Or maybe you do and you just do not want to admit it. Speak plain." "Reverend Crawford has been preaching against you for 3 years," Morrison said. "Calling you every name in the book, warning people to stay away from you. Most folks do not pay him much mind, but there are always a few who take that kind of thing seriously. Someone decided to take matters into their own hands. Quinn felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce. The Reverend does not even know me. What have I done to earn his hatred? Morrison gave him a long look. I think you know the answer to that. Quinn did know, but hearing it said out loud was different. Magnolia. His daughter has been riding out toward the Stevens Ranch regular for 3 years, Morrison said. You think the whole town has not noticed? You think her father has not noticed? We have done nothing wrong, Quinn said, but even as he spoke the words, he knew they were inadequate. They had fallen in love, and in Reverend Crawford's eyes, that was wrong enough. Maybe not, Morrison said, but in the Reverend's mind you have corrupted his daughter just by existing, and now someone has taken it upon themselves to drive you out or put you in the ground. Quinn stood silent for a long moment, thinking. Then he said, I need to see Magnolia. That is the worst idea you have had yet, Morrison said. You go near that girl, you will give the Reverend exactly what he needs to turn the whole town against you. I need to make sure she is safe. She is safe as long as you stay away from her, Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. They both knew that was not necessarily true. Quinn left the sheriff's office and walked through the darkening streets until he reached the white-painted house beside the church where the Crawford family lived. Lights burned in the windows, and he could see shadows moving inside. He stood in the street for a long moment, debating with himself, knowing that approaching the house would be seen as a provocation. But he needed to see Magnolia, needed to know she was unharmed, needed to hear from her own lips that she was safe. He was about to walk up to the door when it opened and Magnolia stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and in the lamplight she looked like something out of a dream. She saw him immediately, and her hand flew to her mouth. Quinn, she whispered, glancing back at the house. You should not be here. I needed to see you, he said, staying in the shadows. I needed to know you were safe. She hurried down the steps and across the yard, stopping just at the edge of the fence. This close, he could see the fear in her eyes, but also the determination. I am fine, she said. But Quinn, someone tried to kill my father today. The sheriff arrested a man who said he was sending you a message. I know. I just came from the sheriff's office. You have to leave town, Magnolia said, and her voice broke on the words. You have to go before someone gets hurt. I am not leaving you, Quinn said. You have to. My father is convinced you are the devil himself. He has been preaching against you for years, and now someone has taken his words as a call to action. If you stay, they will kill you. Quinn stepped closer, close enough that he could have reached through the fence and taken her hand. Come with me. Magnolia stared at him, her eyes wide. What? Come with me, he repeated. We can leave tonight, right now. We can go north to Oregon or east to Colorado. We can start over somewhere no one knows us, somewhere your father's words have no power. I cannot just leave, Magnolia said, but there was longing in her voice. My mother, my family, everything I know is here. And what kind of life will you have here? Quinn asked gently. Watching me from a distance, pretending we do not love each other, living under your father's thumb until he decides to marry you off to some man he deems acceptable. Magnolia closed her eyes and tears slipped down her cheeks. I love you, Quinn. I have loved you for 3 years, but I do not know if I am brave enough to leave everything behind. You are the bravest person I know, Quinn said. You have been defying your father for 3 years, meeting me in secret, choosing your own path. That takes more courage than most people ever find. Magnolia, the voice came from the house, sharp and commanding. Reverend Crawford stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the light. Get inside this instant. Magnolia flinched but did not move. I have to go. "Think about what I said," Quinn told her. "I will wait for you. However long it takes, I will wait. Magnolia." Her father's voice was louder now, angrier. She turned and ran back to the house, brushing past her father without looking at him. Reverend Crawford stared at Quinn across the yard, his face twisted with fury. "You stay away from my daughter," the Reverend called. "You are a blight on this town, a poison in the hearts of good people. God will strike you down for your sins." "I have committed no sins against you or your daughter," Quinn said, his voice carrying in the still night air. "I am guilty only of loving her, and that is no sin at all. Love." The Reverend spat the word like a curse. "You know nothing of love. You are a drifter, a cowboy with no family, no faith, no future. You would drag my daughter down into the dirt with you." "I would give her a life of freedom and choice," Quinn said, "something she has never had under your roof." The Reverend descended the stairs, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment Quinn thought the man might actually attack him, but the Reverend stopped at the fence, his face red with rage. "If you ever come near my daughter again, I will see you hanged for it," the Reverend said, his voice shaking. "I will call every man in this town to defend her honor. I will see you destroyed." "You cannot destroy something that has already survived worse than you," Quinn said quietly. "I lost everything when I was 16 years old. I have built myself back up from nothing, and I will not be cowed by threats from a man who uses God as a weapon." The Reverend's hand shot out, grabbing Quinn by the shirt through the fence. "You blaspheme in addition to your other sins." Quinn did not pull away, did not raise his hands in anger. He simply looked at the Reverend and said, "I am not your enemy. I love your daughter, and I would spend my life making her happy. That is all I want." "She is not yours to want," the Reverend snarled. "She is promised to God's service to a life of righteousness and purity." "She is not property to be promised," Quinn said. "She is a person with her own heart and mind. Why can you not see that?" The Reverend released him with a shove. "Because I am her father, and I know what is best for her. Now get away from my home before I fetch the sheriff." Quinn wanted to say more, wanted to make the man understand, but he could see it was useless. Reverend Malachi Crawford had made up his mind years ago, and nothing Quinn said would change it. So he nodded once and turned away, walking back into the darkness with his heart heavy in his chest. He did not go back to the ranch that night. Instead, he rode out into the hills and made camp under the stars, staring up at the vast sky and thinking about everything that had happened. Someone had tried to kill Reverend Crawford to send Quinn a message. That meant someone was watching him, tracking his movements, willing to commit murder to drive him away. And as long as he stayed in Yosemite, Magnolia would be in danger, but leaving without her felt like dying. These 3 years had changed him, had given him something to live for beyond simple survival. Magnolia had awakened something in him that he had thought lost when his parents died, some capacity for hope and joy and connection. Without her, he would go back to being alone, drifting from place to place with no anchor, no purpose, no future. He thought about asking her to come with him again. They could elope, could ride out in the middle of the night and be married in the next town before her father even knew they were gone. But that would mean Magnolia would never see her family again, would be cut off from everything she had ever known. He loved her too much to ask that of her unless she was truly ready. As dawn broke over the mountains, Quinn made a decision. He would stay in Yosemite and face whatever came. He would work hard, keep his head down, and wait for Magnolia to make her choice. And if someone came for him with violence, he would defend himself. He had been running from conflict his whole life, moving from place to place to avoid trouble. But he was done running. This was where he wanted to be, and he would stand his ground. He rode back to the Stevens ranch as the sun rose. the golden light spilling over the valley and painting everything in shades of amber and rose. Tom Stevens was already up, standing on the porch of the ranch house with a cup of coffee in his hands. He watched Quinn ride up and dismount, his expression unreadable. "Thought maybe you had left," Tom said. "Thought about it," Quinn admitted. "But I am staying." Tom nodded slowly. "All right then. But you need to be careful, Quinn. Someone wants you gone, and they have already proven they are willing to get violent." "I will be careful," Quinn promised, "but I will not be driven off by threats." "Fair enough," Tom said. "Just remember, if trouble comes to this ranch because of you, I will have to make some hard decisions." "I understand," Quinn said. "And I am grateful you have given me work all these years. Whatever happens, know that." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "You are a good man, Quinn Yates. I just hope the Reverend figures that out before it is too late." The days that followed were tense and strange. Quinn went about his work on the ranch, but he was constantly aware of eyes watching him. Men would stop talking when he walked past in town. The sheriff made a point of checking in on him every few days, reminding him to stay out of trouble. And Reverend Crawford's sermons grew more fiery and condemning, though he never mentioned Quinn by name. Magnolia sent him a letter 2 weeks after their conversation at her fence. She passed it through the widow Thompson, who brought it out to the ranch wrapped in a cloth napkin. Quinn read it alone in the barn, his hands shaking slightly. "My dearest Quinn, I cannot stop thinking about what you asked me. Part of me wants to say yes immediately, to run away with you and never look back. But another part of me is terrified. I have never been anywhere except Yosemite. I have never made a decision without my father's approval. The thought of leaving fills me with equal parts excitement and fear. But I know one thing with absolute certainty. I love you. I have loved you since the first day we spoke, and I will love you until the day I die. You have shown me what it means to be seen, truly seen, by another person. You have never tried to change me or mold me into something I am not. You have simply loved me as I am, and that is the most precious gift I have ever received. I need more time to think, to plan, to find the courage I know is inside me. But please know that I am not saying no. I am simply asking you to be patient a little while longer. Can you do that for me? Yours always, Magnolia. Quinn read the letter 3 times, memorizing every word. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. She had not said yes, but she had not said no either. And for now, that was enough. He wrote back to her, a simple note that said he would wait as long as it took, that he was not going anywhere, that she should take whatever time she needed. He gave the note to Widow Thompson on his next trip to town, along with $1 for her trouble. The old woman had looked at him with knowing eyes and patted his hand. "Young love," she said with a smile. "There is nothing quite like it. I hope the Reverend comes to his senses before he loses his daughter forever." "So do I," Quinn said quietly. But Reverend Crawford showed no signs of coming to his senses. If anything, his campaign against Quinn intensified. He began visiting families in town, warning them about the dangers of associating with cowboys and drifters. He organized prayer meetings where he railed against sin and corruption. And he kept Magnolia on an increasingly short leash, forbidding her from leaving the house except for church, and closely supervised visits to approved locations. Magnolia felt like a prisoner in her own home. Her father watched her constantly, questioned her about every conversation, monitored her every movement. Her mother, a quiet woman named Charlotte who rarely contradicted her husband, tried to mediate, but the Reverend would not be swayed. "I am doing this for your own good," he told Magnolia one evening after another argument. "That man is poison, and I will not allow him to destroy your soul." "He is not poison," Magnolia said, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion. He is kind and good and hardworking. You hate him only because he does not come to your church. I hate him because he has led you astray, her father countered. Before he came to this town, you were obedient and faithful. Now you question everything, argue with me, defy my authority. That is his influence corrupting you. No, Magnolia said, finding her courage. That is me growing up and learning to think for myself. Quinn has not corrupted me. He has simply helped me see that I am allowed to have my own thoughts and feelings. Her father's face turned red. You are forbidden from speaking his name in this house. You are forbidden from thinking about him, and you are certainly forbidden from ever seeing him again. You cannot forbid my thoughts, Magnolia said quietly, and you cannot forbid my heart. The Reverend raised his hand as if to strike her, but Charlotte stepped between them, her eyes flashing with rare anger. Malachi, she said sharply, that is enough. The Reverend lowered his hand, breathing hard. Go to your room, Magnolia. We will discuss this further when I have calmed down. Magnolia fled to her room and locked the door, her heart pounding. She had never seen her father so angry, so out of control. And she knew in that moment that she could not stay in this house much longer. Something would break, and when it did, the consequences would be severe. She pulled out a piece of paper and began to write, pouring out all her fears and hopes and love onto the page. She wrote to Quinn about her father's rage, about her mother's quiet sadness, about the suffocating feeling of being trapped. And she wrote about her decision, the one that had been forming in her heart for weeks, but that she had been too afraid to acknowledge. She would go with him. She would leave everything behind and start a new life with the man she loved. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, but she knew it was the right choice. She could not live her whole life under her father's control, could not sacrifice her happiness for his approval. She loved him, but she loved herself and Quinn more. She finished the letter and sealed it carefully, then waited until the house was quiet before slipping out her window. She had done this dozens of times over the past 3 years, climbing down the trellis to the garden, and then making her way through the shadows to wherever she was meeting Quinn. But tonight felt different, charged with purpose and finality. She made her way to the Stevens ranch, moving carefully through the darkness. The moon was full overhead, casting everything in silver light. She could hear coyotes calling in the distance and the rustle of wind through the grass. When she reached the barn where Quinn often slept during the summer months, she found him sitting outside staring up at the stars. He heard her approach and turned, his face registering shock and concern. "Magnolia, what are you doing here?" "If someone sees you, I do not care anymore," she said, crossing the distance between them. "I do not care who sees me or what they think. I am done hiding." He stood, reaching for her hands. "What happened?" She told him about the argument with her father, about the near violence, about her mother's intervention. As she spoke, she saw Quinn's jaw tighten with anger. "He almost struck you," Quinn said, his voice low and dangerous. "Your own father." "He is afraid," Magnolia said. "Afraid of losing me, afraid of losing control, but his fear does not give him the right to treat me this way." "No, it does not," Quinn agreed. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "What do you want to do?" She pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "I want to leave with you. I want to go tonight, right now, before I lose my courage." Quinn's eyes searched her face. "Are you certain? Once we leave, there is no going back. Your father will disown you. You may never see your family again." "I know," Magnolia said, and though her voice trembled, it was firm. "But I cannot stay here, Quinn. I cannot live the rest of my life as his prisoner. I love him, but I have to choose myself. I have to choose us." Quinn kissed her then, soft and tender and full of promise. When they broke apart, he said, "We will need supplies, horses, money." "I have some money saved," Magnolia said, "and I can ride. We just need to go before dawn, before anyone realizes I am gone." Quinn nodded. "Give me an hour to get ready. Meet me at the old oak tree on the north road. Can you do that?" "I can do anything," Magnolia said, and she meant it. They parted with one more kiss, and Magnolia made her way back to town. She climbed back through her window and gathered the few possessions she could not bear to leave behind. Her mother's locket, a photograph of her family taken years ago, the letters Quinn had written to her. She changed into riding clothes and tied her hair back, then sat on her bed and waited for the hour to pass. As she waited, she thought about her mother, about how Charlotte would react to finding her daughter gone. There was a part of Magnolia that felt guilty for leaving without saying goodbye, for abandoning her mother to face the Reverend's rage alone. But she knew that if she told her mother, Charlotte would either try to stop her or would be forced to lie to the Reverend, and Magnolia did not want to put her in that position. Instead, she wrote a short letter. "Dear Mother, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I am leaving with Quinn Yates, the man I love. I know this will hurt you and anger Father, and for that I am truly sorry. But I cannot live my life according to his rules anymore. I need to find my own path, make my own choices, and build my own future. Please know that I love you. You have been a good mother, and I will carry your kindness with me always. I hope someday you can forgive me for this. Your daughter." Magnolia, she left the letter on her pillow and climbed back out the window for the last time. The hour was nearly up, and she needed to reach the oak tree. She moved through the sleeping town like a ghost, her heart pounding with fear and excitement. Quinn was waiting for her when she arrived, sitting on a horse and holding the reins of a second mount. He had packed saddlebags with supplies and had his rifle strapped to his saddle. When he saw her, he smiled, and Magnolia felt her heart soar. "Ready?" he asked, reaching down to help her mount. "Ready," she confirmed, swinging up into the saddle. They rode north out of Yosemite as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. They did not speak much, too focused on putting distance between themselves and the town. But as the miles passed and the sun rose higher, Magnolia felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She was free. For the first time in her life, she was truly free. They rode for most of the day, stopping only to rest the horses and eat a quick meal. Quinn led them through the foothills, following trails that would keep them away from main roads and prying eyes. He knew this country well, had traveled through it many times in his years of drifting, and he navigated with confidence. As evening approached, they made camp in a grove of pines beside a small stream. Quinn built a fire while Magnolia tended to the horses, and then they sat together on a fallen log, eating jerky and hardtack and watching the stars emerge overhead. "Are you all right?" Quinn asked gently, taking her hand. Magnolia nodded. "I am better than all right. I am happy. No regrets." "None," she said firmly. Then more quietly, "I am sad about leaving my mother, and I suppose I am sad about disappointing my father, even though he has given me little choice. But I do not regret choosing you, Quinn. I could never regret that." He squeezed her hand. "We will build a good life together. I promise you that. It may not be easy at first, but we will have each other, and that is what matters." "Where are we going?" Magnolia asked. "North," Quinn said. "There is a town in Oregon called Ashland. It is small but growing, with ranches that are always looking for good workers. We can get married there, find work, start over. No one will know us or care about our past." "Married," Magnolia said, testing the word. It felt right, felt natural. "When?" "As soon as we get there," Quinn said. "If that is what you want." "It is what I want," Magnolia said. "I want to be your wife, Quinn Yates. I want to build a life with you, have a home, maybe children someday. I want all of it." Quinn pulled her close and kissed her. And in that moment, with the fire crackling and the stars wheeling overhead, Magnolia knew she had made the right choice. This was where she was meant to be. They traveled for 6 more days, moving steadily north through California and into Oregon. The landscape changed as they went, from the dry hills around Yosemite to the lusher, greener country of the north. They passed through small towns where they bought supplies and kept their heads down, and they camped each night under the stars, talking and laughing and learning each other in ways they never could have when their relationship was secret. Magnolia discovered that Quinn could be funny when he was relaxed, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. She learned that he loved the sound of rain on canvas, and that he could identify every constellation in the sky. She watched him work with the horses and saw the gentleness in his hands, the patience in his movements. Quinn, for his part, was discovering that Magnolia was stronger than he had given her credit for. She never complained about the long days in the saddle or the simple meals or the hard ground they slept on. She helped with camp chores without being asked, could start a fire as well as he could, and had a gift for finding the best places to camp. She was also funny and curious and passionate, with opinions about everything from politics to poetry. They arrived in Ashland on a Tuesday afternoon in late July. The town was nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains, with a main street lined with shops and houses. It was smaller than Yosemite but had a prosperous look to it, with several churches, a school, and a hotel that looked clean and well maintained. They found a justice of the peace that very afternoon, a kindly man named Henry Patterson, who asked no questions about why they had no family with them, or why they were in such a hurry to marry. He performed the ceremony in his parlor with his wife as witness, and 10 minutes later Quinn and Magnolia were husband and wife. Magnolia felt tears streaming down her face as Quinn slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he had bought in the last town they passed through. When the justice pronounced them married, Quinn kissed her with such tenderness that she forgot they were standing in a stranger's parlor, forgot everything except the feeling of his lips on hers, and the knowledge that they were bound together now, truly and legally. They took a room at the hotel that night, and for the first time since they had known each other, they were able to be together without fear or secrecy. Quinn was gentle and patient, and Magnolia felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. They made love slowly, learning each other, and afterward they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking quietly until sleep claimed them. The next morning, they began the work of building their new life. Quinn found a job at a ranch just outside town, owned by a man named Robert Ferguson, who was looking for experienced hands. The pay was decent, and Ferguson offered to let them stay in a small cabin on the property until they could afford a place of their own. The cabin was rough but sturdy, with one main room, a fireplace, and a loft for sleeping. Magnolia threw herself into making it a home, scrubbing floors and hanging curtains and planting a small garden. She found work in town doing laundry and mending for some of the wealthier families, and between her earnings and Quinn's, they had enough to live on comfortably. Life was not easy, but it was good. They worked hard during the day and came together in the evening, sharing meals and stories and affection. They made friends in town, attended barn dances and church socials, and slowly began to feel like they belonged. No one in Ashland knew about Magnolia's father or the scandal of their elopement. Here, they were just Quinn and Magnolia Yates, a young couple starting out in life. But the past has a way of catching up with the present, no matter how far you run. They had been in Ashland for 3 months when a stranger rode into town asking questions. He was a tall man with cold eyes and a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. His name was Thomas Garrett, and he was looking for a young woman who had run away from home. Quinn heard about it from Robert Ferguson, who pulled him aside at the end of the workday. "There is a marshal in town asking about a girl named Magnolia Crawford," Ferguson said, his expression serious. "Said she ran off with a cowboy named Quinn Yates. That would not be you, would it?" Quinn felt his stomach drop. "Did he say what he wants?" "Said the girl's father hired him to bring her back, something about her being taken against her will." Ferguson looked at Quinn hard. "She did not come with you against her will, did she?" "No," Quinn said firmly. "She came because she wanted to. We are married, legal and proper." Ferguson nodded slowly. "Then you had better go talk to the marshal and clear this up, because if he thinks you kidnapped that girl, this will get ugly fast." Quinn rode back to the cabin as quickly as he could. He found Magnolia in the garden, pulling weeds, and the moment she saw his face, she knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, getting to her feet. "There is a marshal in town," Quinn said. "Your father sent him to bring you back." Magnolia's face went pale. "He cannot do that." "We are married." "I know, but your father is apparently claiming I took you against your will." "That is a lie," Magnolia said, anger flashing in her eyes. "I chose to come with you. I chose you." "I know that, and you know that, but we need to convince the marshal," Quinn said. "We need to go into town and tell him the truth before this gets out of hand." They rode into Ashland together and found Marshal Garrett at the sheriff's office. The marshal was sitting behind the desk, looking through some papers, and he looked up when they entered. His eyes fixed on Magnolia immediately. "Miss Crawford, I presume," he said, standing. "Mrs. Yates," Magnolia corrected firmly. "I am married to this man." The marshal's eyebrows rose. "Your father seems to think you were coerced into leaving with Mr. Yates here." "My father is wrong," Magnolia said. "I left of my own free will. I chose to marry Quinn because I love him, and because my father would not allow me to live my own life." "Your father says you were a dutiful daughter who would never have left without influence," the marshal said, his tone neutral. "He believes Mr. Yates here manipulated you." "My father knows nothing about me," Magnolia said, her voice rising. "He knows only what he wants to believe. The truth is that I have been unhappy under his control for years. Quinn did not manipulate me. He offered me a choice, and I made it." The marshal studied her for a long moment. "You are of legal age." "I am 19 years old," Magnolia said, "old enough to make my own decisions." "And you married this man willingly?" "I did," Magnolia said. "We were married by Justice Patterson here in Ashland." "You can check the records if you do not believe me." The marshal nodded slowly. "I will do that. But Mrs. Yates, you should know your father is not going to accept this easily. He has hired me to bring you back, and he seems determined to see this through." "He cannot force me to return," Magnolia said. "I am an adult and I am married. The law is on my side." "The law is complicated," the marshal said. "But you are right that, as a married woman, you are no longer under your father's authority. However, your father could still make trouble for Mr. Yates here. He could claim abduction, seduction, any number of charges that would require Mr. Yates to defend himself in court." Quinn spoke for the first time. "I did nothing illegal. I fell in love with Magnolia, and when she decided to leave with me, I went. That is the whole truth." "I believe you," the marshal said, surprising them both. "But what I believe and what your father-in-law believes are two different things. My advice is to stay here in Ashland, keep your heads down, and hope the Reverend eventually accepts that his daughter is gone." "Will you tell him where we are?" Magnolia asked, fear creeping into her voice. The marshal hesitated. "I was hired to find you." "But I was not hired to drag you back against your will. I will tell the Reverend you are safe and married, and I will advise him to let this go. What he does with that information is his choice." "Thank you," Magnolia said quietly. The marshal tipped his hat. "Good luck to you both. You are going to need it." They left the sheriff's office in a daze. The reality of what they had done, of the consequences that might still come, settled over them like a heavy blanket. They rode back to the cabin in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. That night as they lay in bed, Magnolia turned to Quinn and said, "Do you think he will come here?" "My father, I do not know," Quinn admitted. "But if he does, we will face him together." "I do not want to lose you," Magnolia whispered. "You will not," Quinn promised, pulling her close. "Whatever happens, we are in this together. I am not going anywhere." They tried to go back to normal over the next few weeks, but there was a tension underlying everything now. Every stranger who rode into town made them nervous. Every knock on the door set their hearts racing. They were waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Reverend Crawford to appear and demand his daughter back. But weeks turned into a month, and then 2, and no one came. Marshal Garrett left town, presumably returning to California with his report. Life in Ashland continued its steady rhythm, and slowly Quinn and Magnolia began to relax. Winter arrived, bringing snow to the mountains and cold winds to the valley. Quinn and Magnolia spent their evenings by the fire, talking and reading and making plans for the future. Magnolia discovered she was pregnant in December, and the joy on Quinn's face when she told him made her cry with happiness. They prepared for the baby's arrival, saving money and fixing up the cabin. Magnolia's pregnancy was easy, and she glowed with health and contentment. Quinn was attentive and protective, working extra hours to build a cradle and a larger bed. They had never been happier. Their daughter was born on a warm day in May of 1879, a perfect little girl with her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. They named her Sarah, and she was the light of their lives. Quinn would sit for hours just watching her sleep, marveling that he had helped create something so beautiful. Magnolia would nurse her and sing softly, feeling a completeness she had never known was possible. They were so absorbed in their new life, in their small family, that they did not notice the man watching their cabin from the trees. They did not see him ride into town and ask questions about the couple living on the Ferguson ranch. They did not know that Reverend Malachi Crawford had spent the last 9 months tracking them down, that he had ignored Marshal Garrett's advice to let his daughter go, that he had become obsessed with bringing Magnolia home and punishing Quinn Yates. The Reverend arrived in Ashland on a Tuesday morning in June, riding a rented horse and wearing his black suit despite the heat. He had aged in the month since Magnolia had left, his hair grayer and his face more lined. But his eyes burned with the same righteous fury, and his jaw was set with determination. He found the cabin easily, following the directions he had purchased from a gossip in town. He rode up the path and dismounted, tying his horse to the fence post. Then he walked to the door and knocked, hard and insistent. Magnolia answered with Sarah in her arms, and the sight of her daughter stopped the Reverend cold. He stared at the baby, at Magnolia's shocked face, and for a moment he seemed to have no words. "Father," Magnolia finally said, her voice shaking. "What are you doing here? I have come to bring you home," the Reverend said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "This is my home," Magnolia said, stepping back instinctively. The Reverend's eyes flicked to the baby again. "You have a child. Her name is Sarah," Magnolia said. "She is your granddaughter." The Reverend seemed to struggle with himself, his face contorting with conflicting emotions. "You were not married when you conceived her." "Yes, we were," Magnolia said firmly. "We married in Ashland the day after we arrived. Sarah was born 9 months later." The Reverend sagged slightly, some of the fire going out of him. "You are truly married." "I am truly married," Magnolia confirmed. Quinn is my husband and Sarah is our daughter. We are a family and we are happy." "Happy," the Reverend repeated bitterly. "You abandoned your mother and me, broke our hearts, ran off with a man I forbade you to see, and you call yourself happy." "I do," Magnolia said, and there were tears in her eyes now. "I am sorry I hurt you and Mother. But I could not live the life you wanted for me. I had to choose my own path." "Your path leads to damnation," the Reverend said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. "No," Magnolia said. "My path leads to love and family and freedom. I am not damned, Father, I am blessed." The Reverend looked at her, at the baby in her arms, at the sturdy cabin behind her. He seemed to be seeing her clearly for the first time in years, seeing not the obedient daughter he had tried to mold, but the strong, independent woman she had become. "Where is he?" the Reverend finally asked. "Where is Yates?" "He is at work," Magnolia said, "but he will be home soon. I want to speak with him." "Why, so you can threaten him, try to take me away from him?" "No," the Reverend said heavily, "so I can see for myself what kind of man my daughter married." Magnolia hesitated, then nodded. "Come inside. Wait here." She led him into the cabin, and the Reverend looked around at the simple but clean space. There were wildflowers in a vase on the table, baby clothes drying by the fire, books on a shelf. It looked like a home, a real home built with care and love. The Reverend sat in a chair by the fire and watched as Magnolia moved about the cabin, tending to the baby and preparing tea. She moved with confidence and grace, so different from the timid girl who had sat in his church every Sunday. He had tried to protect her, to shape her into the woman he thought she should be. But looking at her now, he wondered if he had been trying to protect her or control her. Quinn arrived an hour later, walking through the door with his hat in his hands and stopping short when he saw the Reverend sitting by the fire. His hand moved instinctively toward the gun at his hip, but Magnolia stepped forward quickly. "It is all right," she said. "He just wants to talk." Quinn looked from Magnolia to the Reverend and back again. Then he nodded slowly and removed his gun belt, hanging it by the door. He crossed the room and stood beside Magnolia, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Reverend Crawford," he said evenly. "Mr. Yates," the Reverend replied. He stood studying the younger man. "I've come a long way to find my daughter." "She is right here," Quinn said, "safe and happy and loved." "So she tells me," the Reverend said, "and I see she has given you a child." "We have a daughter," Quinn corrected. "Sarah." The Reverend looked at the baby sleeping in Magnolia's arms. "May I?" he asked quietly. Magnolia glanced at Quinn, who nodded. She carefully passed Sarah to her father, and the Reverend held his granddaughter with shaking hands. He looked down at the tiny face, at the perfect features, and something crumbled inside him. "She is beautiful," he whispered. "She is," Magnolia agreed. "And she is loved, Father, so loved." The Reverend handed the baby back and sat down heavily. "I came here to bring you home, Magnolia. I came here to demand that this man release you from whatever hold he has over you. But I see now that there is no hold. You chose this life. You chose him." "I did," Magnolia said. "I chose him because I love him, and because he treats me with respect and kindness. He has never tried to control me or diminish me. He has only ever wanted me to be happy." The Reverend looked at Quinn. "Do you love my daughter more than my own life?" Quinn said without hesitation. "And you will provide for her, protect her?" "I will work every day until I die to give her and our daughter the best life I can," Quinn said. "I may not be wealthy or powerful, but I am honest and hardworking, and I love her with everything I am." The Reverend was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I was wrong about you." Quinn blinked in surprise. "Sir, I was wrong," the Reverend repeated. "I judged you without knowing you. I condemned you because you did not fit the mold I thought a good man should fit. I was more concerned with my own authority, my own pride, than with my daughter's happiness." He looked at Magnolia, and there were tears in his eyes. "Can you forgive me?" Magnolia felt her own tears spill over. "Oh, Father." She sat the baby in the cradle Quinn had built and crossed to her father, kneeling beside his chair. "Of course I forgive you. I love you. I have always loved you." The Reverend pulled her into an embrace, holding her tight. "I have missed you," he said, his voice breaking. "Your mother has missed you. The house is so empty without you." "I have missed you too," Magnolia said. "Both of you." They stayed like that for a long moment, father and daughter reconciling after months of pain and separation. When they finally pulled apart, the Reverend looked at Quinn again. "I owe you an apology as well," he said. "I have spoken against you from the pulpit, have called you terrible names, have tried to drive you away. I was wrong, and I am sorry." Quinn crossed the room and extended his hand. "Apology accepted, sir." The Reverend shook his hand, and in that simple gesture, years of animosity began to dissolve. The Reverend stayed in Ashland for a week, getting to know his son-in-law and granddaughter. He saw how Quinn worked hard at the ranch, how gentle he was with Magnolia and the baby, how other people in town respected him. He saw the life his daughter had built, the happiness that radiated from her. And slowly, painfully, he accepted that he had been wrong. On the day before he was set to return to California, the Reverend sat with Quinn on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I want you to bring Magnolia and the baby to Yosemite for a visit," the Reverend said. "Your mother needs to see her daughter, needs to meet her granddaughter." Quinn looked at him in surprise. "You would welcome us." "I would," the Reverend said. "And I will make it clear to the congregation that I was wrong about you, that you are a good man who loves my daughter. It will not be easy for me to admit my mistakes publicly, but it is the right thing to do." "Thank you," Quinn said quietly. "That means a great deal." "Magnolia loves you," the Reverend said. "I can see that clearly now, and you love her. That is all a father can really hope for his daughter, that she finds someone who will cherish her." "I will cherish her every day of my life," Quinn promised. The Reverend nodded. "I believe you." When the Reverend left the next morning, it was with hugs and tears and promises to visit soon. Magnolia watched her father ride away and felt a weight lift from her heart. She had not realized how much his disapproval had been weighing on her until it was gone. That night, as she and Quinn lay in bed with Sarah sleeping in her cradle nearby, Magnolia said, "I cannot believe he came around." "Love has a way of opening even the most stubborn hearts," Quinn said, stroking her hair. "I am glad," Magnolia said. "I am glad Sarah will know her grandfather, that we do not have to be cut off from my family anymore." "So am I," Quinn said. "Though I would have been content to live the rest of my days here with just you and Sarah." Magnolia smiled and kissed him. "You are going to be stuck with more than just us. I want a house full of children, Quinn Yates. I want laughter and chaos and love." "Then that is what we will have," Quinn promised. They did visit Yosemite the following spring, traveling south with Sarah, who was almost a year old and walking. The reunion between Magnolia and her mother was tearful and joyous, with Charlotte holding her daughter and granddaughter for long minutes without speaking, just crying tears of happiness. True to his word, Reverend Crawford had addressed his congregation and admitted his errors. He had publicly apologized for his treatment of Quinn and had asked forgiveness for letting his pride come before his daughter's well-being. It had been a humbling experience, but it had also earned him respect from many in the community who appreciated his honesty. Quinn and Magnolia stayed in Yosemite for 2 weeks, and during that time, Quinn even attended Sunday service. The Reverend preached about forgiveness and redemption, about the importance of seeing people as they truly are rather than as we fear they might be. And when the service was over, several people came up to Quinn to shake his hand and welcome him. They returned to Ashland with promises to visit more often, and over the next several years, they made good on those promises. The relationship between Quinn and his father-in-law grew warmer with each visit, and Charlotte became a frequent correspondent, writing letters filled with news and advice and love. Quinn and Magnolia's life in Ashland flourished. Quinn eventually saved enough money to buy a small ranch of his own, 50 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it. They built a larger house with room for the growing family they both wanted. Sarah was joined by a brother named James in 1881, and twin girls named Rose and Lily in 1883. The ranch prospered under Quinn's careful management. He was known throughout the region as an honest dealer and a skilled cattleman. Magnolia became involved in the community, helping to establish a school and a lending library. They were respected and liked, known as a couple who had overcome obstacles to build a good life together. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Quinn surprised Magnolia with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Charlotte and the Reverend, who had sold the house in Yosemite, and moved to a small town closer to Ashland to be near their daughter and grandchildren. The Reverend had retired from preaching, and now spent his days reading and playing with his 4 grandchildren, a much gentler and happier man than he had been a decade earlier. Quinn and Magnolia spent a week in San Francisco, walking along the waterfront, eating in fine restaurants, and staying in a hotel that was far fancier than anything they were used to. On their last night, they stood on the balcony of their room watching the sun set over the bay, and Magnolia leaned back against Quinn's chest with a contented sigh. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" she asked. "Some days it feels like yesterday," Quinn said. "Other days it feels like a lifetime. Do you ever regret it?" Magnolia asked. "The way we started, running away, causing such trouble." Quinn turned her in his arms so he could look into her eyes. "I have never regretted a single moment from the day I met you. Everything we went through, every obstacle we faced, it brought us here. To this life, to our children, to each other. How could I regret that?" Magnolia smiled and kissed him. "I love you, Quinn Yates. I loved you when I was 19 and standing at that fence telling you I did not know if I was brave enough to leave. I loved you when we rode away from Yosemite in the dark. I loved you when we married, and when Sarah was born, and through every moment of these 10 years. And I will love you for every moment we have left. And I will love you," Quinn said, "until the day I die and beyond." They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. 2 people who had chosen each other against all odds, who had built a life out of courage and love and determination. They had faced condemnation and pursuit, had risked everything for the chance to be together. And in the end, they had won. Not just each other, but a family, a home, a future. Years passed, as they always do. Quinn and Magnolia grew older, their children grew up, and eventually grandchildren arrived to fill their house with noise and laughter. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Quinn taught his son James the cattle business, and the 2 of them worked side by side for decades. The 3 daughters all married local men and stayed close to home, building their own families within a few miles of the ranch. Reverend Crawford lived to see all 4 of his great-grandchildren before he passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82. His funeral was well attended, with people coming from all over the region to pay their respects to a man who had learned humility and grace in his later years. Quinn spoke at the service, talking about forgiveness and redemption, and there was not a dry eye in the church. Charlotte lived another 5 years after her husband's death, spending most of that time with Quinn and Magnolia. She died surrounded by her family, holding Magnolia's hand and telling her how proud she was of the woman her daughter had become. Quinn and Magnolia aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year. They took to sitting on the porch in the evenings, rocking in chairs Quinn had built with his own hands, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. They told stories about their children and grandchildren, reminisced about their early days together, and made plans for whatever time they had left. On a warm evening in June of 1918, 40 years after they had married, Quinn and Magnolia sat on that porch watching their youngest great-grandchild play in the yard. Quinn was 74 years old now, his dark hair gone silver and his face deeply lined. Magnolia was 69, her blonde hair faded to white but her blue eyes still as bright as ever. "You remember the first time we talked?" Magnolia asked, smiling at the memory. "You were fixing that fence post, and I was supposed to be delivering bread to the widow Thompson. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," Quinn said. "Standing there in the sunlight with that basket on your arm, I could barely string 2 words together." Magnolia laughed. "You did seem tongue-tied. I thought maybe I had interrupted your work." "You had," Quinn said with a grin, "but I did not mind." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the shadows lengthen. Then Magnolia said, "I am glad I chose you at that altar, Quinn Yates, even though we were not technically at an altar when I chose you. I am glad I had the courage to run away with you that night." "Best decision either of us ever made," Quinn agreed. "You think we would have been happy if things had gone differently?" Magnolia asked. "If my father had approved of you from the start," Quinn considered the question. "Maybe. But I think the struggle made us stronger. We had to fight for each other, had to prove that our love was worth the sacrifice. That gave us a foundation that nothing could shake." "You are right," Magnolia said. "We built this life together, brick by brick, choice by choice. And it has been a good life, Quinn. A wonderful life." "The best," Quinn agreed. They sat together until the stars came out, until their daughter Rose came to the porch to tell them dinner was ready. They went inside surrounded by family, by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all existed, because 2 people had been brave enough to choose love over duty, freedom over fear, each other over everything else. Quinn Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1920, at the age of 76. He had been working on the ranch until just a week before, refusing to slow down even as his body grew frail. Magnolia was with him when he died, holding his hand and whispering that she loved him, that she would see him again someday. She lived another 3 years, spending that time writing down the story of their life together for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She wanted them to know how it had all started, wanted them to understand that love was worth fighting for, that sometimes the right choice was the hardest choice, and that courage could be found in the most unexpected places. Magnolia Yates died on a summer morning in 1923, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch with the story she had written resting in her lap. Her children found her there, a peaceful smile on her face, and they knew she had gone to find Quinn. They buried her next to her husband on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and the dates of their lives with one additional line carved beneath. They chose each other and chose well. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, a testament to what Quinn and Magnolia had built. Their story was told and retold, becoming family legend, an example of what true love looked like and what it could accomplish. In the years after Magnolia's death, Some of the old letters between her and Quinn were discovered, tucked away in a trunk in the attic. The family read them with tears in their eyes, seeing the depth of feeling that had existed between the cowboy and the preacher's daughter. One letter in particular, written by Magnolia just before they left Yosemite, became a family treasure. My dearest Quinn, tomorrow we leave everything I have ever known to start a new life together. I am terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. But I know with absolute certainty that I am making the right choice. You are the right choice. You have always been the right choice. My father will never understand, but perhaps someday he will accept it. For now, I am choosing to trust in love in you, and in the future we will build together. Whatever comes, we will face it side by side. I love you with all my heart, all my soul, all my being. I am yours now and forever. Magnolia. The story of Quinn and Magnolia became more than just family history. It became a local legend in Ashland, told to new generations as an example of love conquering prejudice and fear. Young couples would visit their graves, would walk the land they had claimed and cultivated, would draw inspiration from their courage. The church in Ashland where they had married eventually put up a small plaque commemorating their wedding, noting that they had been married on July 18, 1878, and had remained devoted to each other for 42 years until Quinn's death. It became a popular spot for weddings, with couples wanting to exchange vows in the same place where Quinn and Magnolia had bound their lives together. The cabin where they had first lived, which had been preserved by the family, became a kind of shrine. Visitors could see the cradle Quinn had built for Sarah, the rocking chairs he had made for the porch, the books Magnolia had read by lamplight. It was a testament to how a simple life, lived with love and purpose, could leave a lasting mark on the world. In the decades and centuries that followed, as Ashland grew from a small town to a thriving city, as the world changed in ways Quinn and Magnolia could never have imagined, their story endured. It was a reminder that some things, love, courage, the choice to follow your heart, were timeless and universal. The descendants of Quinn and Magnolia Yates spread across the country and eventually the world, but many remained in Oregon, drawn back to the land their ancestors had claimed. They carried with them the story of how their family began, of the preacher's daughter who loved the cowboy her father had damned, and who chose him at a metaphorical altar even when it meant losing everything else. It was a story of defiance and devotion, of sacrifice and salvation. It was a story that proved love was not always easy or convenient or approved of, but that it was always worth fighting for. Quinn and Magnolia had taught their children and grandchildren that the right choice was not always the easiest choice, but it was the one you had to make anyway. In the end, their legacy was not the land they had claimed or the wealth they had accumulated, or even the large family they had created. Their legacy was the love they had shared, the example they had set, and the proof they had provided that sometimes, against all odds and in the face of all opposition, true love really could conquer all. The preacher's daughter had loved the cowboy her father had damned, and she had chosen him. And in making that choice, she had found not damnation but salvation, not loss but gain, not the end of her story but the beginning of the most beautiful chapter she could have written. Together, Quinn and Magnolia Yates had built a life worth living and a love worth remembering, and their story would echo through the generations long after the last person who had known them personally was gone. Their graves still stand on that hill overlooking the ranch, weathered but well maintained by family members who make the pilgrimage regularly. On the anniversary of their wedding each July, descendants gather there to share a meal and tell stories, keeping the memory alive. And on quiet evenings when the sun is setting over the mountains, some say you can still see two figures sitting in rocking chairs on that old porch, holding hands and watching the stars come out, together for eternity just as they were in life.